mention the tuition thing now, or?
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Hi.
I just want to tell you you're awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, whose first name starts with A? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I would like to see it tomorrow. Like, I'll be here between your class. I'll talk to each one, and then the next day, whatever letter starts. At least this week, I want to talk to each one of you individually once this week. Okay. So let me start that. So tomorrow, those who you start with A, I guess I'll call you by name. So just letting you know that I would like to talk to each one of you before the end of this week. Okay. See how things are progressing, how we're working, where you stand with everything. All right. Okay. Let's start with some conditions that are inherited. So now, huh? Yeah. Let me check. Good. Now we're talking about if you have autosomes and you have X chromosomes, that means if there's a gene located in one of those chromosomes, you can inherit that. So as a result, when you inherit something, you pass it on to your children, and they have the likelihood of having that disease. There are names for those inheritance. Let's talk about some of those inheritance. Let's start with the types. I'll list the types of inheritance first, and then I'll go over each one of them individually. Okay? If this takes us 2 days, it's okay, because it's very important that we understand. It's super easy, but once you get it, it's super easy. So if you pay more attention, maybe you have to get it only once. It's not difficult at all, but people suffer from genetic knowledge. I don't know why. Not genetic diseases, genetic knowledge. Okay. So we have autosomal recessive diseases or inheritance, autosomal dominant, okay, X-linked recessive, X-linked dominant. Good. So at least 4 possibilities how you can inherit a condition, and all of it would depend on what? Where do you find that gene? Is it on the X chromosome, or is it one of the autosomes? Y chromosome has no genes on them. Okay, the only gene it has is testicular gene, and either you're male or you're not, or a person's hermaphrodite. Yeah.
Are you getting mitochondrial?
Yeah. So mitochondrial diseases or inheritance. Mitochondrial inheritance. I'll put MI. Mission impossible. Yeah. Although it's mission so possible, unbelievable, super, super easy. So mitochondrial inheritance. You could have a condition that is partially genetic, partially environmental. What would you call that? Multifactorial. Many factors are involved. One of them is genetic. One of them is your diet. One of them is lack of exercise. One of them is stress. One of them is smoking. So again, multifactorial. Multifactorial. These are conditions inherited in which fashion? In multifactorial fashions. For example, blood pressure. You could have weak blood vessels, and on top of that, you keep eating salt and cholesterol and smoke and alcohol and being angry personality. Oh my God. The likelihood of you having hypertension, by far, very high. Or you can have, for example, genetic increased production of epinephrine by adrenal medulla, or your adrenergic neuron from your nervous system. So you can have genetic components to it and environmental. Okay? So multifactorial. There's one more inheritance, it's called imprinting. Imprinting, which is completely genetic. Okay, completely genetic. And I'll go over each of them one by one. If anything else comes, then I'll tell you that. Yeah.
So in hemophiles, using inherited genotype or phenotype?
Both. Mhm. So again, let's put it this way. Every human being, just to answer your questions, although this would be a good idea to do it where? In the reproductive system. Every human being is destined to become a female. Every human being, so you have two ducts, mesonephric duct and paramesonephric duct. Okay? Mesonephric duct, for example, if it stays, it will give rise to male genitalia. Paramesonephric duct will give rise to what? Female genitalia. Now, let's say this is, or in other cases, called Wolffian duct for men. And how about for female? Mullerian duct. You see the W and M are switched. Should have been women for W, M for men. But anyways, Wolffian duct is for men and Mullerian duct for female. Okay. Now, Mullerian duct will become, for example, uterus, fallopian tubes, and cervix, and the upper 1/3 of vagina or birth canal. Wolffian duct will become scrotum, not even scrotum, so let me just say urethra, prostatic urethra, and it will become prostate gland, although it comes from somewhere else. What's left? There you go. For whatever reason, so in this case, prostatic urethra and then penile urethra. Yeah. Okay. Testosterone is required. Testosterone, this is just additional, you don't have to worry about it. Testosterone is required for persistent of Wolffian duct. So who produces testosterone? Testes. If you have testes, which is the Y chromosome codes for testes. If a man has testes, obviously they'll produce testosterone. Testosterone will allow Wolffian ducts to grow and become big and mature and become male organs. Testes also produces something known as Mullerian inhibitory factor. Mission Impossible. Female. Okay. This causes inhibition of Mullerian ducts, which will dissolve. As long as any human being has access to testosterone during fetal development, then that human being will become male. Phenotypically. Genetically, in this case, this is Y chromosome, so let's say there's X, which is genetically female. Now, female doesn't have Y chromosome. If they don't have Y, they will not have testes. Instead, they will have ovaries. Okay? And ovaries produce estrogen. But persistent of Wolffian duct depends on testosterone. Degeneration of Mullerian duct depends on what? MIF. So, let's say in this case, in one case, it's a female, genetically female. Okay, genetically female, which means they have ovaries. They don't have testes because they don't have the chromosome Y, right? So ovaries will produce what? Estrogen. Estrogen promotes the growth of Mullerian duct. For Wolffian duct to persist, what do you need? Testosterone. For Mullerian duct to persist, what do you need? You need the lack of MIF. You need a lack of MIF. So if there's no testes, MIF is supposed to be not there, and Mullerian duct will grow. But sometimes ovaries, estrogen can be converted back to testosterone, or there's a tumor in female, and they produce external testosterone. Now what happens? Wolffian duct persists, and Mullerian duct persists, and that could be hermaphrodite. So it depends what scenario we're talking about. The most common type of this sort of condition is a testicular feminization syndrome. Men do have testes, or these boys, these newborns, they have testes. So they're genetically male. Okay, so they're genetically male. Again, this is just on the side because it was a question. So they're genetically Y chromosome, and Y chromosome will produce testes, and that testes will produce testosterone. So Wolffian duct is supposed to persist, but it will also produce MIF, which means Mullerian duct is supposed to degenerate. True? Okay, so Mullerian duct will degenerate, no problem. That means no internal female genitalia like uterus, fallopian tube, and so forth. But now, the thing is, testosterone receptor is defective. You can have all the testosterone you want. The receptor is not responding. So what happens to Wolffian duct? It degenerates. This person is not a male, not a female. Externally, you cannot tell. Internally, they don't have uterus. They don't have fallopian tubes. But they have testes in the scrotum. They will have testes in the scrotum. But their penile structure and shape will be slightly confusing and ambiguous. Okay? So there's many possibilities. Many possibilities. You know when people say like homosexuality is genetic, there's no gene for it. They take these things into evidence, which is not true, but anyhow. Okay, so let's start with these conditions. Let's start with autosomal diseases first. We'll talk about two types of autosomal diseases, recessive and dominant. Autosomal recessive and autosomal dominant. Okay. Generally speaking, when we talk about dominant and recessive, the best way to explain them is to use small letters for recessive and capital letters for dominant. Okay? So I'll write it down, then I'll erase it. Dominant allele or gene should be expressed with capital letters. Let's say in this case, capital D. Recessive should be expressed with small letters. Now you have to choose one letter and just use the capital and the smaller version of it. So small d. You cannot use R for recessive. Use the same letter. So same letter will represent what? Same gene. If you want a gene to be represented by D, use D for both recessive and dominant. It depends. It's up to you which letter you want to use. But don't use letters like O, like C, because you cannot tell which one is capital, which one is small. Right? They're the same shape. Just for simplicity, for you to understand. For example, we have language is limited, right? Language has limitation. In order to explain something, sometimes you have to use abbreviation. Sometimes you have to say, I'm going to think that dominant should be represented by D, capital D. Recessive should be represented by small letters. It's just, you have to assume that, okay? There's no reality to that. Genes don't exist in that. Gene is just a code. It doesn't mean like A, B, C, D, that is the code. Those technically not letters, they are nucleotides. Nucleotides are always the same shape. Okay, so don't confuse those two things. For autosomal recessive disease, now a good example of autosomal recessive disease will be achondroplasia. Let's write that down. One condition. Achondroplasia. Achondroplasia is a mutation of growth factor receptor 3. Growth factor receptor 3. So it's a problem in what? Growth factor receptor 3 mutation. Oh yeah, why am I saying here? Dominant, no, that's it. It should be, you're right. I thought this is dominant. So achondroplasia, yeah, listen to me more. That's good. Achondroplasia is autosomal dominant disease. And let me write for autosomal recessive, let's say, is there any common disease you know? Yeah, we can use cystic fibrosis. Although I don't want to, yeah, that's fine. Cystic fibrosis is fine. Okay. Cystic fibrosis is a chloride channel deficiency. Chloride channel defect. Negative means defect. Achondroplasia is in growth factor receptor 3 problems. It's not deficiency of the growth factor receptor, it is superactive. It's always on. It's always on. So I'll put a star or a plus. It's always on. See, these are some switches in the body. They're on or off. It's always on. Okay? Now, we'll leave the diseases for later, but cystic fibrosis, you don't have to write this down. I just want to give you some background. Cystic fibrosis is a disease of exocrine glands. It's a disease of thick mucus. You know, these human beings, when they have this disease, they produce thick mucus. And it's #1 genetic disease of Caucasian population, especially common in Ireland, or Irish people. Okay, that's cystic fibrosis. So what happens is thick mucus blocks your airways, bronchi and bronchiole and so forth, and it causes trouble breathing and infection in the lungs, so pneumonia. It blocks your pancreatic ducts. It causes malabsorption. And it can block your intestine, cause constipation. And it can sometimes even produce, and a lot of time the first thing is they produce thick sweat. And the sweat will be rich in chloride, sodium chloride, tastes like salt. So those are the things you should be looking for, which you'll learn regardless where? In the respiratory system. Because it's primarily a disease of the respiratory system, cystic fibrosis. Okay, achondroplasia. Now you guys are aware of growth plates. Long bones have growth plates. Long bones have growth plates. For example, if this is the femur, you know, in the neck of femur, there should be, in children up to the age of 18, there should be a gap between the head and neck of these bones. So there's a gap and there's a gap. These are called growth plates. These growth plates are primarily made of cartilage. So there's a receptor found there. Growth factor receptor 3. Growth factor receptor 3 is primarily found where? In growth plates. In growth plates. There's a lot of growth factors receptors. So this is one unique one. Number 3 is found where? In growth plates. So if growth keeps occurring very slowly in these plates, that means this will grow this way and this will grow this way, then there's no fusion. A person can grow very tall. But if growth is rapid, that this area is filled up with bone, and then they will fuse. When they fuse, there's no room for elongation of bones. Rapid growth at this level leads to short people, and slow growth leads to tall people. And it all comes to what? Estrogen and testosterone. If you have too much testosterone at that age of growth, you will stay a little bit shorter compared to maximum height, the potential of height that you have. And height is again multifactorial. There's genes involved, there's diet involved, there's environment involved, there's multiple things. And of course, stress, exercise, smoke, all these things will affect it. So if growth factor receptor is always on, that means there's too much growth here. This can lead to dwarfism. Dwarfism. And again, dwarfism. You know midgets, you've probably seen them on TV, those tiny little Austin Powers, if that helps you. You know, Mini-Me, right? There you go. Okay, now, dwarfism, when you want to identify dwarfism, you're going to compare the trunk to limbs ratio. So in dwarfs, usually the trunk ratio is normal, and especially in achondroplasia, not those type of dwarfs. The trunk is of normal height. It's their feet, leg, and arm that are short. Because other bones are not affected. It's only long bones in achondroplasia. Okay, so long bones. They will have normal height of their trunk, their back, but their legs and arms are short. Make sense? Let's see how they are inherited, because we have some background now. Cystic fibrosis is inherited in which fashion? Recessive fashion. Okay, so obviously there's many possibilities for this inheritance, depending on the genotype of who? Parents. Okay, depending on the genotype of parents. Let's use letter A, capital A for dominant gene, small a for recessive gene. Okay? What if you have a parent? So let's say here is mom and here is dad. Again, I'll write here, capital A represents dominant cystic fibrosis gene. small a represents recessive cystic fibrosis gene or allele. In order for this to become a disease, you must have both copies what? In the recessive form, because this is what? A recessive disease. If this is a recessive disease, you must have both copies in the recessive form. Make sense? Okay, if you have one copy recessive, one dominant, there's no disease. The only way recessive diseases will be disease if you get both copies that are defective. Let's do one thing. Mom, both copies of her genes are what? Dominant in dad. How many children in this case will be diseased? Zero. This is recessive disease. 100% normal. Now, so all of them will give you randomly 1A from each parent. You get 1A from each parent. There's 4 possibilities. Now, this 4 possibilities, I was asked the question earlier. Let's do this. Why are there 4 possibilities? Although you can only have one child. Why are there 4 possibilities? For that, I have to use colors. Now, mom has 2 copies of A, one yellow, one green. They're both normal, but yet they're different copy. They're different chromosomes. Good? What did I say, Mason? Oh, let's do this one green. There you go. Yeah, sometimes I say things and I write things all over the place. So look, that means there should be 4 possibilities because there are 4 different types of alleles. 2 from mom, 2 from dad. But the dad can give you what? The green one or the orange one. It's random. So let's say this. What's going on? Something happened. There's freezing involved. Anyways, let's say first child, each square will represent one child, correct? Okay, the first child will get what type of gene? Yellow and orange. So orange from dad can combine with maternal yellow or blue. That's 2 different types. How about the second child? There you go. Even this guy. So A. So the first child, for example, the first child can have a genotype, can get 1 orange from the dad. You can only get 1 allele from a dad. You get either green or what? Or orange. You cannot get 2 from dad. Because all sperms are haploid. They'll carry 1 copy of the gene. Now the likelihood of a sperm carrying orange or green is 50-50. And then depending which sperm will come and fertilize. So from dad you get either the green or the orange. Now these guys, green or orange from the dad, depending which egg does it combine with. Yellow from mom or blue from mom. So at the end you have 4 different possibilities in terms of genotypes. But of course they're all dominant, so it's 100% all the same genotype. I just want to show you colors that which allele did you get from dad, which you get from mom. Okay. In this case, so this is one possibility. If both parents are homozygous, or the term homozygous, let's talk about that. What's homozygous? Same. Heterozygous? Different. So in this case, all 4 possibilities are homozygous dominant. So if both parents are homozygous dominant, that means their children will be what? Homozygous dominant, 100%. And they will be all healthy because the disease is inherited in which fashion? Recessive fashion. So that's one possibility. That means these parents will always give you normal, healthy children. Not only that, they will have their genotype normal. They're not even a carrier of the diseased allele. Phenotypically they're normal, genotypically they're 100% normal. because genotypically they don't even carry the disease allele. They don't carry it. Because every gene that they carry is what? A normal gene. Okay. So that's one possible. Let's switch only one thing. Let's switch now. Mom has one copy. Mom will have one copy of the diseased allele. So mom is a carrier. Dad is not a carrier in this case. Dad is what? Homozygous dominant. Mom is heterozygous. She has one normal copy, one abnormal copy. Make sense? What is the likelihood of her children having the disease? 0%.
Oh, zero.
But half
Yeah.
carriers.
Good. So now let's do this. Here you go. So we'll focus on two things: phenotype and genotype. Genotype and phenotype. If you get confused, disease phenotype, so let's say normal phenotype, normal, and then we'll write one more normal, just in case, and then diseased. Now with recessive disease, normal type would be what? Capital A, correct? And capital A, small a, correct? Disease will be small a, small a. Phenotype, genotype, normal. I give you already here, so it's the same thing. I should have taken this, put it here. There you go. Much better. So anybody who has the genotype AA, phenotypically they're normal. Anybody who has A, capital A, small a, they're normal. The only time you will have a disease product or child if their genotype is what? Recessive. They will have a disease. Okay. Now let's do this. In this case, how many capital A's do you have? Both. Genotype completely homozygous dominant. Homozygous dominant genotype. How many? 2. How many heterozygous? 2. How many recessive? 0. So there is 0 disease patient. And phenotypically they're all 100% normal. Make sense? Okay. So I'm going to get rid of the colors because let's start seeing it without color. You should be able to see without color. One possibility was that both parents are what? Homozygous dominant. And the end result of that was everybody has this one genotype. And everybody phenotypically is normal. No disease. That's one. Let's do one more type. So the next type is, let's say the mom has a small or diseased allele. Or dad. So in this case, the likelihood of the children are 50% of the children are genotypically carriers. And 50% genotypically are homozygous dominant. Phenotypically, they're all normal. Because the only way you can have a disease if you have 2 A's, 2 small A's. Is there any possibility of having 2 small A's? No. Not in this case. Not in this. Later on, yeah, with a different, yeah, not right now. With these 2 parents. So that's one type. There's 4 possibilities. Let's go with another one. Let's say now, both parents are carriers. Let's say now both parents are carriers. You see, we're changing the genotype of parents to see what are the possibilities of them having children. Now both parents are carriers, correct? So child 1, you know what I'm going to do this, so that way we know child 1, I'm going to color it green so we can relate to it. Child 1 will be the green area. Now in reality, child 1 can be even the yellow square. It doesn't matter. Just for us to have some sort of understanding. It's not necessarily like, and then child 2, let's call it blue. And child 3 is this purple. Just for us to have the understanding. So okay. Based on this, parents, look, parents can have different genotypes. There's different variety of parents. So I'm going to go over each parent. Okay, I will go over each parent. Let's say you have two parents that get married. Both of them are carriers. There's one possibility, both parents are what? Let me give you the possibilities because I think sometimes people get confused. What are the possibilities of a dad genotype? Dad can be AA, could be AA, small a, and then small a. What are the possibility of a mom? Same thing. She could be capital A, and then a carrier, and a recessive. So now, this man in a population can get married 3 times. Not 3 times, with 3 different possibilities.
4 times.
Does not exist. Okay. What if this man marries this female or this female or this female? What are the likelihood of them having children with disease?
0.
Good. Okay, so that's what I want to go over all of them. Now, this man can marry this person or this person or this person. And then what are the likelihood? Again, depends. Okay. This man can marry this person or this person.
Only ones if the recessive will be 100%. The recessive
Yeah.
percentage again.
Okay, so we'll go over each of them. That's what I want to try to do right now. Show you how it will work. Okay, you can do them at home. Once you do it once, you should never have a problem. Okay, so let's go with this possibility first. We did this one, right? We're done with this, right? Okay. Now let's do this possibility. Did we do this one?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So this is done. Now let's do this possibility then.
Basically did that.
Okay. So let's do.
That one should be capital A.
Both capital.
If you want to do that one.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. In this case, the likelihood of being a carrier is 100%. Everybody's a carrier. Nobody has a disease. Everybody's a carrier. Everybody's a carrier. So, at the end, we should have some rules and regulation for autosomal recessive diseases. Okay. So that's one possibility. What if you have, let's say, this person getting married to this person, right? So then you have 50% are carriers and 50% are diseased. You have to do this. You have to know that it's very straightforward. Okay. Let's say this person gets married to this person. Now, dominant, carrier, carrier, and carrier. So 25% is dominant, homozygous dominant, genotypically, right? 50% are what? Carriers, and then 25% diseased. Or, in this case, homozygous recessive. Okay? This is the most common type you'll find in populations because the frequency of carrier is much higher. So most people with recessive disease in that population that's endemic, not outside of the population. When you talk about cystic fibrosis, you'll find a lot of carriers where? In Ireland, less in Africa, less in China because it's Caucasian disease. Yeah? But when we talk about glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, you'll find a lot of carriers. Where? In North Africa, Mediterranean, Turkey, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Egypt, endemic area. Okay, so it depends what we're talking about. Hemophilia, mostly in England. So it depends. Which areas are endemic? See, the more you dilute the genes, meaning the more you marry outside of your ethnic group, the more you're diluting the gene, and the less likelihood of having a disease. The more you marry within the family, or the immediate relatives, or the community, or the ethnic group, the likelihood of you having that disease is much higher. Because you will come across people that have the same genotype. It's much, much higher within that family. So at the end of the day, we gotta have some rules. Do you understand? Now there's many possibilities. And which possibility will come for you? It depends. Now, let's do some rules. Autosomal recessive disease, do they depend on gender? No. So men and female are equally likely to inherit a disease. All recessive diseases. Men and female are equally likely to inherit a disease. An autosomal recessive disease. So that's one. Because when you look at the pedigree in your books, I'll draw one for you. This should prove right. Normal parents can have I'll put a capital C, cystic fibrosis, I'll put, so, and you guys know what I mean by that. Can have cystic fibrosis child. So normal parents can have diseased offsprings. Phenotypically, right? Genotype, you don't know. A carrier is normal. So if two carrier, male and female, they marry and they have children, the children can have 25% chance. So two normal parents can have cystic fibrosis child. And what is the chance of that? 25%. 25%.
But still, but I'm asking, not necessarily to happen. I mean, if they have 4 children. Like if they have 4 children.
Yeah.
Still not necessarily to happen.
No, each child has 25% chance. Each child. So the first son does not depend on the second, the third not on the fourth. They're independent events. So the first child, it doesn't mean like if you have the first child healthy, the second healthy, third healthy, the fourth is 100%. No.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's actually what I'm asking.
Yeah. Okay, so remember that.
There are some diseases that are like that, right?
No. Remember, we have to go back to what? To the basis. Segregation of chromosome is what process? Random.
I'm not asking.
It's a random phenomenon. Okay, it's not programmed. It doesn't mean you only have 4 genes and you take one and you're left with it's a random thing. So one child's inheriting a disease will not depend on the second and third and fourth. They're independent events. Okay. This will only occur if you have 4 things. If you use this one, there's 3 left. If you use this one, there's 2 left. If you use this one, there's only 1 more left. The gene, you can copy it as many times. Each time it's the same gene. You don't have limited number of genes. You have 2 copies. Which one you inherit depends. Okay? As long as you keep inheriting both normal copies from each parent, or at least 1 normal copy for 1 parent, you'll never have a disease. So it's still a random phenomenon. Independent assortment. Remember that thing. That's why I said this is the basis of genetics. Independent assortment. Independent assortment. Independent segregation of chromosome. 1 chromosome don't depend on the second one. Maternal doesn't depend on paternal. Paternal doesn't depend on maternal. So they're completely independent events. So it's chance. Which one gets activated? Which one gets copied? Which one gets what? It's a chance. Okay. So number 1, male and female in all autosomal diseases, men and female are equally likely to get a disease. Normal parents in recessive only can have a child with a disease. And the likelihood of that is what? 25%. 25%. Now, if you have one normal, if you have a carrier, so let's say a carrier, one parent that is a carrier, and one parent that is diseased, the likelihood of them having a child is 50%. Okay, so you can come with those things, but I'm only going to talk about the basic of recognizing these pedigrees. There's many possibilities, but the only disease where normal parents can give rise to or can have a child that's diseased has to be recessive. Only recessive diseases could be inherited from normal parents. Only recessive. And it's common sense too if you think about it. In order to get a recessive disease, you have to inherit one defective copy from each parent. Okay? From each parent. In this case, homozygous dominant parent, if you have one, at least one parent that's homozygous dominant, you will never have a disease. The children will be 100% secure. The only time you will have a disease if both parents minimum carry one disease copy. That's the only time recessive diseases will be inherited if both parents at least have one defective copy. That's minimum requirement. If they're both diseased, 100%. If both carrier, 25%. One normal, homozygous, and one disease, 0. If one carrier, one disease, 50%. So you only have two possibilities where the children will have a disease. Both carriers, which is 25% chance, or one disease, one carrier, which is 50%. Any other scenario, or unless they're both diseased, then it's 100%, right? So three possibilities that children can have a disease in recessive fashion. Either both parents are diseased, 100% of the children will have a disease. You want me to write it down, or are you okay? So we have three possibilities where of parents that can give you diseased children in this fashion by autosomal recessive. Male and female, both equally likely. That is, if both parents are diseased, 100% of the children will have a disease. That's one scenario. Another scenario is one parent is a carrier, the other parent is diseased. 50% of the children will have a disease. Other possibility is both parents are carriers, and then 25% chance of having a disease. Make sense? Any other scenario of parents will not give you a disease. Okay?
More complicated when there's more than one gene involved.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Locus heterogeneity, we'll discuss that. That's a complicated one. Yeah. Okay, so again, the only disease where normal parents can give you a diseased child is recessive disease. Recessive disease. Recessive disease. Okay, how do you recognize recessive disease? Whenever normal parents have abnormal child. In recessive disease, there's skip generation. In recessive diseases, there is skip generation. I mean, normal parents giving an abnormal child, that is skip generation. The parents didn't have it, the grandchildren has it, right? So, skip generation. Okay. Now, in dominant disease, there is no skip generation, if you want to compare it. In dominant disease, there is no skip generation. Every generation should express the disease. But in dominant disease, yeah.
Like, so when you say that, like, with genetic amplification, where you're onset every time, could it be, is that multifactorial based, or is it like based off of just probabilities, just the genes that's being passed on?
Say it again.
It's like for genetic amplification,
Mhm.
like the onset happens earlier.
Now, genetic amplification of what?
Like, let's say autism.
Okay, so trinucleotide repeat. Okay, that's a complete different scenario.
Okay.
So that's, it doesn't fall, it is autosomally dominantly inherited. It's not a single gene. The gene is not defective. What you have is too many nucleotide repeats. So it's an instability issue. I'll come to that. Okay, so trinucleotide repeat is a complete different scenario. Okay? Not all autosomal dominant are trinucleotide repeats. Okay? Yeah. All right, so there's exceptions that don't follow Mendelian rules. Like Huntington's, we'll discuss them separately. Okay? All right. So again, for autosomal dominant, male and female are equal likely to get a disease or inherit a disease. Each generation should, I'm not saying would, so please pay attention to my language, should have the disease, should. But there's something else, again, later on I'll tell you, incomplete penetrance. You might have the disease allele, but you might not express the disease. Not everybody with that disease allele will express the disease. It doesn't penetrate everybody equally. Okay. So now with dominant, what do we say? Normal parents can never have abnormal child. So let's see autosomal dominant here. Autosomal dominant, male and female are equally likely. Okay. Normal parents can't, never, ever will be able to give you a diseased child unless it's spontaneous mutation, meaning it's not inherited, it's spontaneous. It just comes out of viral infection or something else that causes a problem in you. Okay, there is no skip generation. No skip generation. Each generation must, should have the disease. And actually it does. Maybe the period, the time, some will get it early, some later. Okay? Eventually, every autosomal dominant disease gets expressed. Okay. Are we okay so far? So it's very easy to differentiate between them. Very easy. Okay, wow. Let me compare X-linked recessive and then I'll show you pedigrees. Let me show you. Let's compare X-linked recessive too. So let's say X-linked recessive, X-linked dominant, autosomal recessive, autosomal dominant, and let's include here mitochondria. Okay, mitochondrial inheritance. Isn't MIT a famous school or something? Where is that? Texas? Massachusetts. Okay, X-linked. Now let's differentiate. In X-linked recessive, men are more likely to get a disease than female. Okay, that's in X-linked recessive. Men are more likely to get a disease. X-linked dominant, male and female are equally likely to get a disease. There are some exceptions though. Autosomal recessive, male and female are equally likely. Autosomal dominant, same thing. Mitochondrial, same thing. Okay. Okay. What do we say about X-linked recessive? Normal parents, I'll put a P. Normal parents can give diseased children. Autosomal dominant, normal parents can't. Okay. Now, so that's point 1. Point 2. In autosomal recessive disease, there are skip generation. Not every generation will have it. For example, if I have the disease, my children will not have it. My grandchildren might have it.
So it doesn't have to actually be literally skip generation?
Mm-hmm.
It can be like generation 3?
Yeah, I mean, it is truly skip generation, but people, when they start getting married within families, then the rules does not apply. Then the likelihood of having...
Literally skip generation, like...
Yeah. Yeah. In autosomal dominant, every generation will have a disease.
For autosomal dominant, what do you mean by normal parents?
Normal parents. If a parents have no disease, they cannot give it to their children because they don't. You need one copy. You either have that single copy or you don't. If you do, you're going to express the disease. So there is no carrier state. In the autosomal dominant, there is no carrier state.
Even disease or not?
There's carrier here. Carrier is genotypically abnormal. Phenotypically, they're normal. So if a carrier marries a carrier, the likelihood of them having a child with a disease is 25%. In autosomal dominant diseases, there's no carrier state. There's no hidden gene hiding. If you have one copy, you will express the disease. So there's no way you would not know that you have a disease or not, right? Mitochondrial diseases are only, I mean, let's go here. Okay. Dad, recessive disease, dad can give disease to his son in autosomal recessive. Dad can give a disease to his son. Okay? In autosomal dominant, same thing. In autosomal recessive, for a dad to give you a disease, mom must at least be a carrier, right? So you have to get both copies, one from each parent. In mitochondrial diseases, dad can never give you a disease. I'll explain why that is. Let's just go over them. You can never inherit mitochondrial disease from a father. Never, ever. Very good. Mitochondrial diseases are only inherited from who? From mother. They're only inherited from mother. You can never inherit it from dad. Okay, I'll come back to that. Let's go here. X-linked recessive. X-linked diseases can never be inherited from a father. I shouldn't say that way. Let me just put it a different way. Dad can never give disease to his son. Which means what? Male to male transmission is not allowed. There is no male to male transmission in X-linked diseases. Dominant or recessive, doesn't matter.
Can or cannot?
Huh?
Can or cannot?
Cannot. Male to male transmission. Dad can disease, cannot. Cannot give disease to his son. So put here give. So male to male transmission, not allowed. You know, dad can only donate what to his son? Y chromosomes. If dad gives you X chromosome, you're what? Female. So from dad you can only get one chromosome in terms of gender, that's Y chromosome. And Y don't carry any genes. So therefore you can never inherit an X-linked recessive disease from a father when you're a son. So there's no male to male transmission. No male to male transmission. Okay? So these are the things that will help you identify these pedigrees, and I'll tell you what pedigree means. So for now, just know this, and I will show you on pedigrees and Punnett squares how this works. The reason mitochondrial disease are only inherited from mother, because it's the egg that becomes an embryo. Okay, it's the egg, and then we'll take a break. Here's the egg, and the egg will have 23 chromosomes, correct? So the egg can have only 23. What's the genotype of an egg?
Female.
Only 23X. There you go. Okay. Let's say 23X is waiting in Starbucks. And then there is now a sperm. Remember, sperm has head, neck, and then a body and the tail, right? So, but sperms, you have two types of sperms. Either X sperm or Y sperm. The genotype should be also 23, right? So don't get me wrong, it's the same genotype, 23X or 23Y. Do you know you have, not only in terms of genetic makeup you have two types of sperms, but in terms of physical appearance you have two types of sperms? Do you guys know that? No?
Sorry, what is that about?
Physically, in terms of physical appearance, you have two types of sperms. And I only heard this in my evolutionary psychology class. That was, I don't know how long, a long time ago, undergrad. You have a curly tail sperm and a long straight tail sperm. Guess what's the significance of that? Faster swimming. So the long tail sperms are known as lovers. The curly tail sperms are known as fighters. Believe it or not. The curly tail sperms will prevent any other sperm from other human being to reach an egg. They'll fight. That's the evolutionary purpose of them. So if at the same time you have two sperms from two different human beings, the curly tails will start fighting each other, or will fight the long tail ones of the other human beings. So competitions from day one. I thought that was crazy when I found that. So, but anyhow, okay. Now, let's say we have this one of these sperms. Only the long-term sperms can actually cause fertilization. Curly tail can't. Curly tail, they suicide. No, not too busy. They're meant to fight to allow the long tail to reach an egg. Because if the long tail sperms are fighting, they will lose a lot of time. And yeah, it's urgent scenario. So if you want to meet in Starbucks, you better be on time, kind of thing. The thing with the long tail sperm is the birth canal. You know, my grandma used to tell me a story. It was crazy. Back in the days in Afghanistan, you know, it's a poor country. Still, it's a poor country. I haven't been for 23 years, so I don't know how it is. But when I was there, it was really poor. And especially me being born in a small village. All the houses are made of mud. You know, like if you watch the Christ movie or Moses, similar thing. And female used to wear the same thing, just like in Moses' time, those red scarf, long, just cover themselves. When people wanted to get married, what did they have to do? Young men. Small society, not much selection. It's a small village, and there's no cars and planes to move around and see people, or no internet at least, or no work. Not 10 million in one town like here. So there was limited girls and limited guys. So when you want to get married, you better have something to prove wealth and blah, blah, blah. So people have to leave Afghanistan and go somewhere else to work. The only countries that were good for working was India, which is its neighbor, and Russia. Okay, those are, or sometimes China. Those are the neighboring countries. So what they would do is they will have to pack a lot of food and put it behind their back, and maybe if they have a donkey, and they travel by feet. And those are days of travel, weeks of travel to go. And then go make some living, come back and buy gold and whatever, so you can get Mrs. Queen and Prince, you know? So when I thought about it, sperm does exactly the same thing. Sperm has, and imagine going through, there's mountains there that are called Hindu Kush mountains or Himalayas, whether you get to Caucasus, Russia, or there, you have to go through these mountains. It's a very harsh environment. Snow there is usually 6 feet. In Afghanistan, it's not that there's too much snow, especially in the mountain area. It's year-round. So for people to go, they have to pack food, and they have to walk. Sperm actually does the same thing. The uterus is a very harsh environment. Birth canal is a very harsh environment for sperm. He has to pack fructose, that's what he uses only for energy, and he has to swim as if you go by feet from here to Michigan in cold winter. How many of those sperms can survive? Birth canal, you have a bacteria known as lactobacillus. Continuously produces what? Acidic environment. Because it's an opening to protect itself. So that acidic environment makes birth canal actually sterile. Very sterile. Free of all sort of pathogens. So for sperm to pass this acidic environment, it's suicide. So that means what they do is they group. It's crazy, they group. In warfare, you've probably seen that in some countries when there's small people, the whole world is, like after them. So what they do is there was one case I think in Chechnya. and they were surrounded by like 3 layers of defense by the communist army, like 4-6 layers. So what they did is few of them had to sacrifice, make a hole for the rest of them to escape. Sperm does the same thing. What it does, they go in groups, and then to protect themselves, 1 or 2, 3 can make it to the egg, but the rest of them have to commit suicide. The curly tails actually are only for suicide. They're supposed to prevent every other sperm that is from a different human being to go there. So it's unlikely for a lot of sperms to reach there anyways. A lot of them. Only a few hundred will reach. And whatever's the lucky one, or randomly the first one who attaches to the egg, done. The receptor, see the egg has receptors on its surface. And the sperm, the first one that attaches, the whole layer dissolves. Think of it like those scientific movies. The shape completely changes. No other sperm can enter the egg after that. It's crazy. But let's do that. So now the mitochondria of sperms are found where? In the body. This is where the mitochondria of sperms are located. In an egg, it's a true cell. It doesn't have flagella, it doesn't have a body, it's just a spherical cell. Everything is inside. So the sperm has its DNA in the acrosome or in the head. This blue part, that's where the nucleus is. This is the nucleus of the sperm. And the head of the sperm, I'll do red, has enzyme from Golgi. That's known as the acrosome, from lysosome. And what are those enzymes supposed to do? Digest. We talked about lysosomes. Acrosome is the same thing as lysosome. But in sperm, the acrosome comes from where? Lysosomes. So when this sperm reaches the egg and it attaches, immediately the acrosome will dissolve and it will release this acidic content. And when you do that, what happens to the phospholipid layer? There's lipases in there, right? It'll punch a hole in there. And the only thing that goes is the 23 pair of chromosomes. The only thing that can enter the cell, egg, is the DNA. And what happens to the rest of the sperm? This beautiful girl waiting in the Starbucks, as soon as she gets the DNA, and it kicks you out. Get out of here. The rest of it falls off. Now you have what? You have the mitochondria. Do they enter? Did they ever go into the cell? No, this is the zygote. This will become fetus. And this will become a baby. The only thing that contributed to baby development was what? DNA from a sperm. Not the body, not the head, not the mitochondria. So if there's defect in the paternal or the sperm mitochondria, you will never get it. You will never get it. So that's why you only get mitochondrial diseases from a mom. And guess what? If you have mutation in mitochondria of a cell, that means all children will get it. Not 1, not 2. 100% of your children. Number 1, you get it from mom, and if you do get it from mom, all children will get it. So look for those things. Okay, let's take a break, and I'll go over some pedigrees.